is relevant to everybody in Australia. I should say this is not just a Victorian piece of information. This is Australia-wide. It's just this particular webinar has been funded by the Victorian State Government, which I'll talk about. So we'll begin. So first of all, acknowledgement of country. I'm hosting this webinar today from the lands of the Bunurong people. I acknowledge their elders, past, present and emerging. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands that the attendees on this call live and work on, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that join us on this call today. So welcome to everybody. Now, before we start this, we've got 3 quick questions. If you could, there's another QR code. I'm hitting you with all the surveys today, but if you could possibly scan this for me as we begin this, and I've got this QR code will be on the first couple of slides. So if you could do this as the pre-presentation questions, it's just so we can gauge what you already know about this topic. And so if you could start doing that for me before we begin, that would be great. Now we'll cover off all the housekeeping parts. So any comments that you'd like to add, please pop them in the chat. At the end, we will have a Q&A session. So if you've got a specific question about the information that we have today, please pop it in the Q&A at any time, and we will endeavour to get to all of that at the end. There is a lot of information to get through, and you might feel a bit bombarded, but if there's anything, you can also reach out to customer service if you've got questions at the end. If you complete this webinar today, there's one CEC in it for you, and in order to get that, you need to complete the survey at the end, which captures your membership number and so on, so we can allocate you with that. Any issues at all with that, don't hesitate to contact customer service and they will help you with it. So I'm joined today on this call by Michelle. She is our Education and Compliance Coordinator at AusActive. She's also working with me. We've got a grant from the state government to do this wellbeing activity, which is to create mentally healthy workplaces and promote wellbeing in the small business community in the exercise and active health space. So that's why we're here today. So Michelle's going to keep an eye on the chat box and the Q&A. This is her first webinar between you and I. So she's very excited to be here, and so am I, because I love talking to you all.
Thanks.
So as I said, the QR code is on the, oh, sorry, Michelle wanted to say hello. Say hello, Michelle.
Hi, everyone. Thank you.
If you've ever been audited, you probably have come across Michelle's desk at some point. And I always love these webinars when we get the staff from AusActive on, because it puts a face to a name. So you've now met Michelle. So as I said, this Q&A code in the corner is for the 3 questions. If you're just joining us, if you're new, just if you could do those 3 questions, just so we can gauge where your knowledge was at in this space before we started this, just to see the impact of these sorts of education webinars. So there are lots of changes to the workplace health and safety regulations around maintaining and reporting mental health injuries in the workplace, and preventative measures around avoiding mental health injuries in the workplace. It is in effect Australia-wide now. In Victoria, the regulations and how they're going to play out has not been announced. They're lagging behind, not because they're slow, but because this is a really complex space. If you have had a look at anything around this, you will know that there's a lot of information involved in it. And some of the states, you can see down the bottom here, some of them were quite early off the mark, especially WA there, to get their regulations in place. I would expect that some of those states will probably, there'll be a lot of changes. So just so you're aware, this is when these came into effect, and you can go to your relevant state body regulator to find out more information. So what we're going to do here today is really have a look at just some very broad information so that you understand what is in these regulations more or less, and how they actually specifically look in this industry, with some examples for you. So we'll move on to have a look at how it actually works. So Safe Work Australia come up with what they call the model regulations. So they decide how these regulations are going to look. And then all of the states and territories work out things like the risk assessment requirements, sanctions, or how things will be enforced, the reporting requirements. And they use a lot of safe work resources, but they also come up with a lot of their own. So all of the states and territories are slightly different. For argument's sake, I believe the Safe Work New South Wales, from what I can tell, they have the highest level of reporting and requirements, and some of the others aren't quite as strong in the space as what New South Wales is. So it's best to check your own state regulatory body. It depends on where your business is run and where your workers are as well. So with us, some virtual work going on and people might be employed in different states and territories, there's lots of different regulations, things that you need to understand about that. All right, so why do we need to create mentally healthy workplaces? So there has been a big increase, which I'll show you on some stats in the next slide, a big increase in the number of claims on work cover for serious mental health injuries in the last few years. And so now the government has decided, the federal government's decided that we need to treat mental health injuries in the workplace as importantly as what we do physical injuries and risk around those as well. So we know we spend around about a third of our life at work, or a third of our day in any case, and that's significant. We build relationships there. We have lots of experiences at work. It often can dictate how we feel about the world, puts us in a socioeconomic bracket. There's lots of different things that work does for us. So it's really important that when you're at work, you feel safe and you enjoy what you're doing. And it's not just about the people. It's actually one part of creating a mentally healthy workplace that's often overlooked, and that is that when you do that, that workplace is often likely to be more profitable for the business. So if you have issues with the workplace not being a mentally healthy workplace, you're likely to get a high turnover of staff. People aren't turning up to work, and when they do, they're not really there. They're just there in presence, if not in spirit so much. And so what does that do? It affects a business's ability to be profitable and to be viable. So there's quite a big picture when it comes to this. And I hope today this webinar is not just for people that employ staff. This is for anybody that works in a workplace, basically. So if you are employing staff, obviously you need to know all of this information. But if you are not employing staff, but you're working in a workplace, recognising that maybe you might not be working in a place that's promoting mental health amongst its staff, but you're not aware of where those issues are really coming from and what they mean to you. So this is really, it's a twofold sort of webinar today with information. So if we have a look at, this is the claims for serious mental health injuries. And as you can see from the 14-15 to 2021 year, we're looking at around about a 50% increase in claims for mental health injuries. The cost is much higher for a mental health injury than what it is for a physical injury. And it also is much higher in the terms of the amount of time that people have off work. So it is, and as you can see, there's just the top left-hand side there, that it wasn't really COVID related. So we can't blame this on COVID, because these are nationwide stats, of course, and every state was affected in a different way to COVID, as you would all be aware, as we've all lived through it. So this is recognising that this is a serious problem. And as you can see on the top right-hand side, that a third of the claims are related to anxiety or stress disorders. So these are things that they can actually control and avoid in a workplace. And so the focus is on trying to do that, because if you don't, and these claims continue to rise at the rate that they have been, up go the premiums that everybody has to pay. So it's a good idea to get in and get this sorted out quickly, rather than waiting for the catastrophic effects that will flow on if these claims continue to rise the way that they are. So what do employers need to do? Now, this hasn't changed. This works for physical injuries or risk in the workplace as well. There's three different aspects that somebody that is an employer needs to keep in mind, that they need to protect, respond, and promote. And as you can see, next to the protect and the respond, there's little legal gavels there. They are legal requirements. The promote part of it is what they would like you to do, but not a legal requirement. So protect, you've got to create and maintain a safe working environment. And then respond. So respond to changes in risk circumstances and equipment, and investigate complaints or concerns with workers. So no industry or workplace is ever static. Things change all the time, and it can be due to internal and external factors. So keeping on top of those changes in equipment and risk and circumstances and everything else is really, really important. And then promoting workplace safety. So that can look like, I'm sure we've all seen posters up on the back of toilet doors or in the staff room and so on, talking about, onboarding activities and all of those sorts of things that we do in a workplace. So, and different places do that in different ways, but definitely the protect and the respond part is the most important. And so the first step to understanding mental health in the workplace and how to avoid major mental health injuries and claims is that protect. So there'll be understanding what a psychosocial hazard is. So this is what this is about. This is about understanding all the different psychosocial hazards that can occur in a workplace, recognising whether they could be in your workplace or specific to your workplace, and then putting some controls in place to remove the risk of those injuries causing a mental health, or those, hazards causing a mental health injury. And we're going to run through what the psychosocial, we're going to run through the definition of a psychosocial hazard, and then I've got 14 examples of the most common psychosocial hazards that occur in any workplace, in industry, but I've got industry-specific examples to help you to recognise how they might look like in this particular industry. So this is the Safe Work Australia Code of Practice definition, and it is the most awkwardly worded piece of information that you could ever come across. But what it basically says is that psychosocial hazards are hazards that arise from the design or the management of work in a workplace, the environment in which you work in, the plant and equipment that you have available to you, interactions and behaviours with other staff members, and if those factors may cause psychological and physical harm. So that's what we're looking at, is whether any of the factors that appear in your particular, and we'll talk about this individual workplace, could cause a mental health injury. So psychosocial hazards, it's an aspect of a job or workplace that increases the risk of work-related stress and or mental health injuries. So we know that stress is cumulative. So if something is going on and it's very short, it's a short-lived experience, then that happens. And I always use the example, say staff members go on holidays or somebody's on sick leave and other people have to pick up some extra work or so on, then that's a short-lived stress. But when something is recurring, it's happening and happening and happening, then we are definitely, we're looking at the risk of a mental health injury increasing. And some psychosocial hazards will be present across roles in any workplace, in any industry. I would say, like, customer service is the greatest, like anyone that is customer facing runs the risk of being, having an abusive customer or difficult customers. It doesn't matter what industry you're in, it is, once you are client facing or customer facing, you run that risk. And some hazards will be particular to an individual role or specific working environment. So you can have some hazards are much more likely to happen in some in roles and not in others. So it is you really have to do quite a deep dive into the type of workplace you're in and the roles that exist in that workplace. And in the same way that we identify physical hazards in the workplace, we must also identify hazards that could impact the mental health of workers. So this is where the government's really placing their focus. It's been going on, it's in the pipeline for about 2.5 years, I think it is now, off the top of my head. There's been a lot of work done in it. I've spent the last 5 months doing a lot of reading of these guides and attending some seminars and so on. And I feel like I'm only really scratching the surface, but it just seems to be more, because it's an ever-changing and ever-evolving sort of, it's a living thing, really. So that's something to keep in mind too, that what is right today, just because you get things down pat, doesn't mean that it's going to stay that way. Often these regulations and requirements do change over time. Oh, we've lost a whole slide there. And we move on. Industry examples. So this is where we're going to start to look at these, at the 14 different examples of where how they can occur, what they are, what the common ones are, and how they can occur. So this is to begin with, just to really think, just to put a broad sort of an umbrella across the industry. These are, did a bit of a brainstorm of lots of different types of environments, working environments that you'll find in this industry. And as you can see, they can be vastly different. And some of them are even within yoga studios. There can be differences amongst those types of workplaces. So this is just a reminder that the examples that we're going to look at today are not there. I've picked something different, or a different working environment and scenario for every single one of the 14, There's also a learning module on this I'm going to talk about that we've developed that's available free of charge as well. That has different examples. So I've made sure that for every single one of these psychosocial hazards, you're going to have 2 working examples available to you to try and help you understand how it might work in this industry. So now we'll start to take a look at them in their individuality. So emotional demand. This is any task or activity that involves a worker employing skills that might see them hide their emotions or require them to display emotions on the outside that they are not feeling on the inside. So, for example, a fitness facility dramatically changes the roster of group exercise classes with little warning to the members or workers. A worker feels that the changes to the roster are really negative. However, when clients complain, they are required to suppress their personal opinions and instead be very positive about the changes. So again, this is a client-facing issue that you've had, the decision has been made, you're expected to wear that, and it's really, really difficult for you. And there's lots of complaints, lots of flow-on complaints, and that it's you're having to put on that smiley face and pretend that everything's okay. So that, of course, can create a level of stress, and then that can accumulate over time. Role ambiguity. So this is when a worker is unsure about whether certain tasks are their responsibility or that of someone else. So the business might also change objectives and goals frequently without communicating the change to their workers. So, for example, a Pilates instructor is told by one manager that they need to sweep the floor after each class. When a different manager sees the instructor sweeping the floor, they inquire why and tell them that it is not their job to undertake that task. The worker then needs to constantly adjust their behaviour and tasks depending on which manager is on duty that day in the studio. So as you can see, and I'm sure we've all worked at places where we've had multiple say duty managers or so on that might be on, and they've all got a different idea of what needs to be done in that space and in that time that you're at work. And so you're trying to, as a worker, navigate those 2 people because you don't want to create an issue in your own role. And this role ambiguity comes along because you're just not quite sure what you're actually supposed to be doing. Role conflict. So often presents with role ambiguity. Often these 2 go hand in hand. And often some of these do really cross over, as you'll see. Can include a worker being expected to perform in a certain way that is against their own values, morals, standards, or beliefs. The example of this is an exercise professional is expected to meet a sales target on a particular 6-week challenge package. They find it to be against their own personal values to encourage their clients to participate in the challenge and have feelings of guilt each time one of their clients decides to take part. So that pressure to engage in certain activities or to push certain, I suppose, packages, products, services, those sorts of things, can put pressure on somebody. It's like, oh, I don't agree with this. I know that it's not really for me. And so what they're likely to do is leave the job. And in some instances, that might be great. But in other instances, they might have some wonderful qualities that you really want to keep in the business. But this is just one thing that, that is really causing a sticking point and causing some stress for them. So working out how to manage those scenarios with people will reduce that the risk of a mental health injury occurring. Role overload. So I'm sure we've all experienced this at some point. And this occurs when a worker cannot realistically or logistically meet the demands of their workload or complete the requested tasks in their working hours. For example, an exercise professional is expected to maintain a minimum number of clients for personal sessions each week. That quota means that they often have clients back-to-back in between leading multiple exercise classes, which leaves them little time to prepare for either the classes or the clients. As the months roll by, they find it increasingly difficult to keep up this pace. And as I mentioned before, some of these, we recognise that in a short period of time that they're not as much of an issue, but over a long period of time, say this, as the months roll by, nothing is changing. It's still the same issue occurring over and over and over again. And that's where you're likely to get that cumulative stress problem. Group relationship conflict. And this occurs when differences arise between workers and those differences are not managed effectively. So some of these have come directly from the People at Work website, which is a great, if you have more than 20 staff, People at Work, you can actually undergo basically ask people about their job design in the workplace, and you can gain a like it's a survey outcome that tells you where the issues might lie in your own workplace. So this comes from there, and some of these examples that they give, or these explanations they give, are actually a clue to the controls. It says here, this occurs when differences arise between workers and those differences are not managed effectively. So we're not saying that you have to remove all differences between people in a group relationship scenario when they're working together. What needs to happen is you need to manage them effectively to make sure they don't become a problem. And that's what this example basically says. An aquatic centre has a large number of workers, most of whom get along well and work together as a team. Recently, one worker has been telling some of the other workers that they feel the roster is not fairly distributed between instructors, and some instructors are being favoured over others by management. The manager who this worker reports to is aware of the conflict this is causing amongst the group. However, they choose not to address the issue and instead allow it to continue, which creates more unrest and unnecessary conflict between the workers. So we're not going to talk about control measures today because they look very different, vastly different, depending on the working environment that you're in. But what we can say here is that basically if you manage those differences effectively, they're less likely to then cause a mental health injury. Group task conflict. So you can imagine if you've got group conflict in general, and then you try and get workers to do a task together, you can imagine it's not going to go well. So group task conflict occurs when there are ill-defined roles within a group task, or when there is a lack of boundaries around which staff can complete tasks. E.g., staff from a Pilates studio are asked to help set up a display that the studio has at an upcoming wellness expo. The instructors attending volunteer to do so and attend inside their working hours. The studio has issued some guidelines around how the display stand should be set up, but when the instructors arrive, they all have differing views on how the task should be managed. Disagreements follow, and tension is clearly evident amongst the group when they are present at the expo, which creates an uncomfortable environment for staff and patrons. So again, this, if if you manage this correctly, you're not likely to have these issues. And the last thing you want, obviously, is when you are client-facing to have some of the staff displaying conflict towards each other, because it becomes evident and it does affect the business and the environment that people are attending that business in. So it is not just about the workers. Obviously, as I said before, it is about the entire business as a whole. Job control. This is probably the biggest one, or one of the two at the end, which you'll notice that everybody sort of knows about those in the workplace. But this one in particular, job control, having low job control is one of the major contributing factors to a mental health injury in the workplace. And it refers to a worker's ability to influence the way they work and other factors that go on in their working environment. For example, a group exercise instructor has been working as an exercise professional for many years and prides themselves on their knowledge and understanding of best practice in their work. A new policy is implemented by a manager that restricts the type of warm-up exercises the instructor can do at the beginning of each class. When the instructor pushes back on these changes, they are told the new policy stands and they must adhere to it. The instructor feels that they are not given an opportunity to discuss their concerns or find an alternative they could agree on. So again, this really comes back to that emotional issue as well, that they're doing something that is against their better judgment, their value system, or even their professional understanding of what it is they do in their role. And then they're told, but you don't matter. What happened, what we've decided, what's going to happen, I'm not interested in your experience, your skills, your knowledge, or your feelings. You're going to do as you're told with absolutely no discussion. As I said, job control is one of the major ones you should always look at when you're assessing psychosocial hazards in the workplace. Very important. Supervisor support. I'm sure everybody that's on this call that's a supervisor is a wonderful supervisor, and I'm sure most of the people that have had a job at some point have had good and bad when it comes to supervisors. This refers to a worker's ability to gain support when needed from the people they report to in the workplace. So, for example, a yoga instructor has been asked to lead a particular class. They've been working as an instructor for many years, but have never led this particular kind of class and lack confidence around being able to do it properly. They go to their manager to talk through their concerns. However, the manager does not help them to identify whether they are capable of leading the class, and instead just removes them from the roster for that class without explanation or looking at additional training and practice. Again, here we have a bit of an indicator of what might be a control measure in this, is that looking at whether or not upskilling, training your staff so that they can manage broader roles in the workplace, because if you just tip people into positions where they're not trained or capable, or they don't feel skilled in those roles, it creates an environment where you can experience a mental health injury, whereas the solution to this, the control to this, might be providing additional training or practice or conversation or confidence building around what it is that worker actually capable to do. Worker may be 100%, this instructor might be 100% able to do these classes, they just lack the confidence, and it might just be that supervisor's support to say, look, I know where your skill set sits, I know you can do this, this is why you've been selected. But if you just take them out the roster and don't say anything, then that just creates other issues and conflicts. Co-worker support refers to a worker's ability to communicate effectively with their fellow staff members, to work through difficult situations, share workloads, and receive emotional support during difficult times. For example, a personal trainer has been working with several really tough clients who have at times been rude and often resist trying new exercises. The personal trainer tries to ask other trainers in the facility how they would handle the situation, but the ones they ask laugh and tell them they need to work out what to do on their own, leaving the personal trainer feeling alone and unsupported. Again, this is an overlap with that group conflict and even group task conflict. If you're in a working environment where it's highly competitive, people feel like they are competing with each other, this is co-worker support, job control, group task conflict, group conflict on a whole. These are all things that can occur, and they can occur simultaneously. So it is something to really be mindful of in the type of environment that you're working in. Praise and recognition. So this refers to workers being recognised for the contribution they make to the workplace and for outstanding achievements that workers have accomplished that improve the business and or workplace in general. For example, a club manager notices that the layout of equipment on the gym floor is causing overcrowding in some places, whilst other areas receive less use. They devise a reconfiguration of the equipment to create a better use of the floor space, which makes the members much happier in the space. Despite the weeks of work that go into the project, senior management dismiss the achievement and never make mention of it, despite other staff members being very complimentary. So it's we want workers to come to work. This is where the presenteeism comes into it, that they're at work. We want them to give their best because it's really good for the business and it's good for the clients and the other staff members as a team, in a team environment. Somebody shows some initiative, comes up with a great idea, they make some changes, it works really well and nobody says anything. Where is the motivation to then continue to do that in the workplace? And if there's other factors coming in, it might be demotivating more than it could, that you could be motivated even by praise and recognition. So making sure that but people are recognised for what they contribute, and those above and beyond, or even just doing their job well, contributing some praise and recognition in that fact helps a lot. The other example I often give of this is when somebody new comes into a working environment and management focuses, oh, we've got this new staff member and they're just amazing, they're this or this. And then over in the corner is someone that's been there really doing their job really, really well for a long period of time, but it's just taken for granted, and basically they're not really ever recognised for doing that in that longevity space, and then stand there going, okay, here comes this Johnny-come-lately staff member, and they're getting all the focus, and other people are that are doing their job and been doing it well for a long time have not. So there's lots of different environments or examples of how that might work. Procedural justice, also an important one. It refers to the processes and procedures that management have in place when it comes to determining how resources are allocated, and occurs when decisions need to be made and what occurs when conflict arises. So over the past few months, it has been an ongoing issue keeping the treadmills operational. More often than not, there is only one working and members are complaining. Management decides to renovate the foyer of the facility and allocates resources to that project, ignoring the lack of attention to equipment maintenance. This means workers will continue to face complaints from members regarding the lack of functional equipment. Can only begin to imagine the type of conversations that exercise professionals are having when somebody has come in and equipment has not been working for weeks at a time, but there's a pot plant and a different feature wall and obviously work has gone on in the foyer. And so it's about having those conversations with workers and understanding where the problems sit in the workplace and what can be done to try and rectify the problems in, I suppose, a triage or order of importance, rather than creating other issues for workers that are trying to do their job. Change consultation refers to the communication workers receive regarding changes in the workplace and their right to have a say in how these changes occur if the changes directly affect the worker. There are, for example, there are changes made to the group exercise class schedule. One instructor has been rostered on to do 3 early classes each week without being asked if they're available. The instructor is unable to get childcare in the mornings and could not take the classes. They were not asked about their availability prior to the changes being made, and now they are worried they might lose their job. So you could have somebody that, and this is where a lot of these psychosocial hazards, they don't take into consideration, I suppose, people's personalities. There's only so much you can do. Someone that might not speak up about these things might just leave. And again, we could be looking at a really good instructor that's great at their jobs, that they just can't do an early morning class like that, but they might not feel like they can speak up. And that's where psychological safety comes into it, that there's the 4 steps to psychological safety, which is if people feel included, they feel safe to contribute, they feel safe to learn, safe to learn, safe to contribute, and safe to challenge. And so that's the slide that was missing. It didn't come up for some reason. So basically in this, if someone is feeling included and there's a good level of communication around change and so on, they are likely to say, oh, you know, I'm sorry, I can't do that, and feel safe to do it, and be able to work a solution with the business and management that would work for everybody. These are the last two are very common. I think everyone will know them. They are workplace bullying, refers to unreasonable behaviour that is repeatedly directed at one worker or a group of workers. So, for example, each month in the staff meeting, one manager will continually single out one of the personal trainers to use as an example when it comes to displaying client participation, rather than using a general example. When the trainer asked the manager to stop doing this, the manager told the trainer they were being too sensitive, and then brought the conversation up in the next meeting in an attempt to make the worker feel embarrassed in front of their peers. So anytime you single someone out for their behaviour and continually make an example of them, this is obviously an example of managerial bullying. There can be bullying in amongst staff as well, of course, as we know. So there's lots of different resources, guides and handbooks that are around both workplace bullying and the next one, which is workplace aggression and violence, and also sexual harassment. So any of the, you can either go to Safe Work Australia, which I'll put the website up at the end there, or any of the state-based regulatory bodies all have guides that really walk you through what to do if these issues do arise in the workplace. And likewise with bullying in the workplace, you can actually go to Fair Work, and they have a process. They will actually act on your behalf to walk through the steps as well. So there's lots of different supports available out there for that. Workplace aggression and violence. So this refers to violent or aggressive behaviour by either other members of staff, patrons of the business, or the general public, whether it be directed at the worker or the worker is a witness to the behaviour. So we'll look at this example first, and it's another point that I wanted to bring up too. So, for example, 2 members of staff are working at the front desk of a club when 3 members begin arguing in the reception area over car parking spaces. The argument escalates to the point of physical violence between the members. One of the workers calls the police and yells out to the members to stop fighting as the police have been called. One of the aggressive members then turns their anger towards a staff member and becomes verbally threatening. Both staff members are extremely scared and fear for their safety. This example is very important, because whilst the government would like us to stop all risk associated with psychosocial hazards in the workplace, the reality is there's only so much you can control. And obviously you can onboard and induct staff members and have all sorts of regulations and so on in place, but we can't control the members of the public. And some of these psychosocial hazards, as you would be aware after seeing the examples or the list of them, they come about by external forces, and they might not be, members of the public might not be people attending the exercise facility. They could be people off the street that cause a problem. And also this brings up the example of vicarious trauma, in that sometimes we experience trauma by other people's trauma. So in this instance, that these are people, members that are arguing, it becomes violent, but there's 2 witnesses to that are feeling traumatized, and yet one has been yelled at, the other one is not. It may flow through to other staff members may feel that they don't want to work on the front desk because they might have the same thing happen to them. So what the control measure for that is that if you do something as manager, if you recognize that that happened, recognize that it was a traumatic event, and say this is the procedure that we would have in place if it happened again, that actually creates a level of psychological safety for the workers that are involved in that environment, and then they're more likely to continue to feel safer in the workplace. And that's what you're promoting, safety in the workplace. And with psychosocial hazards, it can look quite different to a physical hazard, whereas a physical hazard, you can put cones around something if it's broken, or a bit of tape, or a do not operate sign. But as far as the psychosocial hazards go, some of them can occur without warning, and as I said, be external to the actual staff in the business. So now we're going to take a look at what happens when you get multiple psychosocial hazards and how that can play out. So this is a hypothetical working environment in the health and fitness industry, the active health industry. And as you can see, everything above the wavy line increases the risk of mental health injury, and everything below, it decreases it. So this person goes along, they're at work, they've got a bit of a client issue, the prices have gone up and people aren't happy about it. It's going to cost them an extra X amount a week or a month. This is a bit of work-related violence and aggression, but it happens as an isolated incident. And then they do some great group exercise classes where everything goes well and they've got happy clients and there's no problems. But then management abruptly changes the gym operating hours, and oh no, I can't work as many hours. It's affecting my income. I didn't see this coming. There was a lack of change consultation, so up goes that risk of mental health injury. And then normal sessions with clients. They're turning up. Everybody's doing what they're supposed to do. But then because of the changed operating hours, when they kick in, down go the number of clients, and because they cancel their sessions because they can't get to the gym at that particular time. And so their job controls drop down. So in isolation, these things can be, as I said before, short-term issues that can cause some stress, and there might be ways to work around this. But generally people can manage them if they come at them kind of one at a time and there's some control measures in place. Now we'll have a look at what happens if they start to really overlap and they're all happening at the same time. So we've got low or no or low change consultation, we've got low job control and workplace aggression and violence. So imagine on this previous slide, all of those things happen together. And so we've got these little overlapping parts where, well, not all of them, so 2 of them happen at a time and then lead on to the third one. So wherever there's an overlapping hazard, that's when the increased risk of mental health injury starts to kick in. So there can be more chance of stress occurring, higher levels of stress over a higher period of time, more things to manage in the workplace, more difficulties and uncertainty and so on. And that's when up goes that risk. And then, of course, we go to what happens if all 3 of them are happening at once. So as you can see in the little orange highlights there, the danger zones, that's what happens when 2 cross over. But then when you get 3, you have an extreme risk of mental health injury. So you imagine there's someone at work, there's all of this going on at once. There might even be external factors as well, and they just feel like they can't cope with all of this. That's when a business is really sitting at looking at the fact that they might be causing, there's just a high level of risk of, or extreme level of risk of mental health injury. And that's when you're likely to incur claims. So where to now? So there's so many different resources. So here's the Safe Work Australia website. As I said before, they're the ones that come up with the model regulations. A lot of the states do use the resources that come from Safe Work Australia. They're a good place to start. You can then go off to your state regulatory body and have a look at what they've got there, look at their guidelines. A lot of them have training videos, information videos. You can also go to complete our brand new iLearn module, which is called Psychosocial Hazards in the Workplace. It's free. It earns you 2 CECs. Very good for anybody that's employing staff. It goes through a much more in-depth look at what we have looked at today. It talks about mental health injuries on a larger scale. It also gives different working examples, as I said, of the 14 psychosocial hazards. It also has a state-by-state list of resources, so the best resources there are for each state for managing and controlling these psychosocial hazards. It doesn't talk about the reporting requirements. There's different states, as I said, they've got different, like something you have to log mental health injuries over a certain number of staff, you need to report them. there's and talk about how you're controlling them and so on. So you really need to know, I can't stress this enough, what is relevant in your state, because you don't want to find out the hard way, of course. And in the modules, there's all these links to these resources. So it's a great one. It's brand new. You can find it through the members area. If you just go into the iLearn section, you will find it. If you're a new member, if you've joined up in the last few days or last week or so, you will have automatically been enrolled in that. So if it's relevant to you, I'd urge you to go and complete it. And then search in the members area for templates, links, guides, and other information. So the members area is undergoing a massive overhaul. If you haven't looked at it recently or in a long time, I'd implore you to go and have a look at it, because it is a changing beast as well. We are putting a lot of these resources in there, so they won't just be embedded in the psychosocial hazards learning module. They'll be there as well. In the new law path facility that we have, there's actually a template in there that you can use to list the psychosocial hazards, the risk level of it, and the controls that you've put in place. So it's a nice little template that you can download if you're a sole trader or business member. If you haven't had a look at LawPath and you've sit into that, then definitely go and have a look. There's all sorts going on in the members area. So lots there to look at. Lots of learning. As I said, you can deep dive in Victoria. There's the Work Well Toolkit, which talks a lot about health and safety in the workplace. You can also reach out to customer service if you need any help with navigating where to find these things. So now we'll do some Q&A. I might invite Michelle back, because she's going to be telling me what these wonderful questions are. I can't see the chat box, obviously. Questions, yes. Michelle, how did we go?
Yes, great. Do you have a few questions here? So where can a person go to for support from toxic/abusive workplace situations if the boss itself has narcissistic personality disorder?
That's good. That's always easy to navigate. So there's several different things that you can do. Depends on what sort of business or what sort of workplace you're in. Often the first place to go is, well, if there's a HR department, you'll go to HR, and perhaps if there's an EAP service, you would go there first and foremost. As I said, if there's bullying going on, there's some guides. So you, as a worker, you can go and access these guides, obviously free of charge, on any of the state regulatory websites, and have a look at what it is that the process is, or what is considered to be bullying. Like, it will define bullying, and then you can actually see. Sometimes I've had people come to me in this industry and say, I need some help with this, and I've walked them through like the steps that they need to take. So there's that as an option. Fair Work will do around bullying. They will assist you with that. They have a procedure in place. You can also ring your state regulatory body and ask them what it is that you can do about it. You can do an anonymous phone call and just say, asking for a friend, this is going on, and they will give you advice as well. So I say there's lots of different WorkSafe, but they're very, they don't want claims. They don't want this to happen in the workplace. There are lots of resources there. If you're a member of AusActive, of course, head straight to the members area, have a look at those resources, see what's there, and work from there.
Thanks. We've got another one here. Is there a union for fitness professionals, or is this a duty of AusActive?
AusActive is definitely not a union. They're a membership organisation. I'm not aware whether there is a union that sits in the fitness and active health industry. That unions are really not my area of expertise at all. They sit very differently from these WorkSafe regulatory bodies. So no, and AusActive is definitely not a union type. We're a membership organisation that's here for the better of the industry. So no, but if you need advice on where to go for assistance, then you'd ring the AusActive customer service line and say, this is the issue I'm having, and they will point you in the direction of a resource or support system. So there are supports out there, but as a union, but no.
We've got, how can psychosocial hazards impact different diversity groups? Diverse staff, Indigenous staff, staff with disabilities. How are they affected differently?
They're affected. Obviously, all of those groups are a little bit different in themselves. So yes, cultural awareness is really important when it comes to workplace health and safety, especially with the psychosocial hazards. So being aware of those groups that you have in that environment, and then and understanding how the working environment will impact them due to those issues. So, or not those challenges. So in some instances, it's really, really straightforward. In other, it's not. Again, this is where we're looking at really individual workplaces and how they can be so different, because some will have a higher level of people that come from a culturally and linguistically diverse background, and others might not. And this is where, when I was saying in the first instance, when it comes to that protect and responding to the changes in the makeup and demographic of your workforce, as well as the environment you're working in, the industry, the equipment, there's all of that comes into that. So it's understanding and communicating with your staff, really. A lot of this comes back to communication.
And on communication, we've got another one. How to manage staff that don't open up about situations like role conflict and job control and conflict.
Yes, and that is where that slide that didn't work, the psychological safety, comes into it. So if you create an environment where there's inclusion, and this goes with clients as well. I've marched out, anyone that has been to any of my webinars or workshops has probably seen this 4 steps of psychological safety slide that this is the first time I haven't shown it because it didn't work. But if you've got an environment where everybody feels included and part of the team and there's no exclusion going on, then you move to the second level, which is they feel so safe to learn. And when they feel safe to learn, they then feel safe to contribute and safe to challenge. So I always say, whether you're working with a client or a staff member, if they aren't feeling secure enough that they can challenge and question things, then you need to go back through those steps and say, where did I lose them? Because every single time, if you've got a client that withdraws, that they've been really invested in what it is that you're doing together, and then all of a sudden they don't want to do it anymore, you go back through those steps, you'll find out that, and it might not be that they didn't feel included, it could be they just didn't feel safe to learn, or they didn't feel safe to contribute, and then so they just withdraw. So anyone, when you've got a staff member, and of course, as I said before, we can't really account for people's personalities, because some people, it doesn't matter what environment you put them in, how open you are, how honest, and how many times you ask, and the environment that you set up for them, they just don't speak up. And that's not necessarily the workplace, that's about them. So, but in an ideal world, when we're doing sort of an overarching look at everybody, if you go through those 4 steps of psychological safety, you will get them to contribute and to challenge.
We have another question. Has the perspective on psychosocial hazards in the workplace received much resistance in your experience? There is an unspoken sense of, if you're unhappy and you're complaining, you're weak. Seems pretty strong in aspects of our society. Absolutely.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, it's that stigma around mental health and talking about it, and, why are you struggling? You've got a great job, you're paid, these conditions are great, I enjoy it here, why don't you? That really goes on. I think that the very fact that the government has highlighted this is a major focal point, and I think it's really slipped under the radar. That the bottom line with this is we need to consider mental health in the workplace and the risk of mental health injuries to be as significant as physical injuries. So you think about all the time and all the effort and all the thought that goes into to avoiding physical injuries in the workplace, the exact same thing needs to happen when it comes to mental injuries. So yes, you're right, the stigma is there. What is different is that as of the 1st of July this year, every single state in Australia needs to recognise this, and they will be held accountable if there's mental health injuries that occur in their workplace. I had a look at recently had a look at last year's claims in Victoria for workplace health and safety injuries in mental health, and there was a business there that what it basically came down to is the guy that was running the warehouse was screaming abuse at the staff. He was quite vocal, ended up with $100,000 fine and $100,000 in damages and $25,000 in fines. There's $125,000 it costs them to go through court for people raising their voice. So if that doesn't indicate how important the government is considering this to be, I'm hoping that the more that we talk about mental health at work, the more that we understand these factors, the less likely the stigma will be there. It's, you know, we have we've got another learning module, understanding mental health in the health and fitness industry, that I collaborated on and released earlier this year. If you haven't done that one, jump in and do it. Have your staff do it. It's more, the more awareness, the more understanding, the more education we do in the space, the less likely the stigma will be there. But the more that these regulations are pushed out as well, it's going to become a much more of a focal point over the next 12 to 18 months for sure.
Definitely. We just have one last one. Just asking you if you could please repeat those safety controls again.
The safety controls, are we talking about?
The learn, contribute, challenge.
Yes, these ones. So, yes. And these are, again, in the learning module. We talk about this all the way back. It's like going back in time, isn't it? Bit of time travel. These ones. Protect, respond, and promote. So, and this is across all states and territories. So, creating that safe environment, responding to the changes in risk circumstances and equipment, investigating complaints. So if someone comes to you, so I had for a case study example, I had somebody, a workplace that had multiple complaints about a manager. I actually rang WorkSafe Victoria about this to ask some guidelines and questions, and they said that there has to be a response in a practicable amount of time, and that is, you know, that varies in workplace, but you have to put measures in place. As soon as a staff member comes to you and says, this is a problem for me, you have to, if it's related to another person, you have to make sure that communication stops between those two people while you investigate what's going on and then respond to it in an appropriate amount of time. So you are expected to respond quite quickly. And if there's danger, likewise, physical danger. So it's thinking about all the things that you would do in a physical danger sense to transporting it across to mental health injuries or to a psychological danger.
Great. That's all the questions.
That's all the questions. Well, I'd like to thank you all for participating today. I'll just take us back through to this last little slide there. I'll go skip, so that you can see the other particulars there of where you can go. So don't forget that you need to complete the outgoing survey to get your CEC. You can always, as I said, reach out to customer service, and please don't think it ends here. There's so much in the members area, and there will be more to come. The other thing I'd like to mention too is that if you are and I'm actually going to pop this in the chat, if you are somebody that works in so my email address is Partners in Wellbeing, make sure I'm getting it right, at AusActive, that's where we are, isn't it, .org.au. If you are running a business in one of the 64 LGAs in Victoria that are considered to be flood affected, whether that be regional or urban, I would love to hear from you, because we want to do some more work in the space to support people that are in the flood affected regions in Victoria. We need to understand what's going on. There's likely to be a focus group coming up, which I want you to look out for. But if you are trying to run a business, I want to hear what's going on for you, what the challenges you're facing. So please shoot me an email so we can have a chat. But if you want to learn more about this as well, head off to that learning module and to the website. And I thank you all so much for participating today. I'm really looking forward to reading your feedback. It's really important because, as I said, as a membership organisation, we are very focused on the members and what it is they need. And we need the feedback, good, bad, or otherwise. Need to hear it so we know which direction to head. So I thank you very much for attending today, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day.